Welcome to the Elvis Presley channel. So much said and heard about Elvis Presley and his intimidating romantic life. If there is one thing the king failed to utilize to his advantage, it may just be his emotions. He may have been the ladies' Prince Charming, but appeared to falter in relationships when it matters most. Of course, he made the same mistake on gorgeous Ann-Margret in what she later described as the electrifying bond that I think had more value in the pages of the gossip tabloid than it did for the two stars. How Ann-Margret shared a devil within with Animal Elvis. Make sure to watch the video until the end, and if you are new here, don't forget to join our wonderful community by subscribing to the Elvis Presley channel. Elvis Presley went on one knee to admit his loyalty to Ann-Margret. Elvis Presley no doubt had a weird and somewhat disquieting romantic tale that I found very disturbing despite his fame and the wonderful love appeal. While the gossip media was agog with what was described as the hottest romantic gist at the time between Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret, it seemed the same romantic irrationality may have denied him that relationship. Some say he had divided attention, or as a writer puts it, distracted by his romantic dreams with Priscilla. Was it not the same pattern of influencing female youngsters he met on screen with his desirability and popularity and leaving them high and dry? Or is it that he was always undecided about what he wanted in those relationships? While we celebrate his prowess as king of rock and roll and possibly a romantic hero of typical American heartthrob, Elvis Presley did not quite impress me in almost all his affairs with women, especially his brief fling with super-intelligent Ann-Margret. I still believe that she matched his personality with her charisma, that it became so weighty for Elvis, so he weakened as the romance climaxed. Ann-Margret has told us how he returned to her and on his knees to beg for love that was already late for him, with some saying he married Priscilla earlier because he did not have the kind of success he wanted with Ann-Margret. Maybe he had second thoughts after catching the intimidating charm displayed by Ann-Margret. We all saw Elvis Presley and Ann-Margret flare up the screen in Viva Las Vegas, and after the production we were inundated with the news of their romantic connection off-screen that did not amount to anything other than wishes. The possible reason they remained friends after marrying different personalities other than themselves is probably that Elvis was hoping that Margaret would change her mind and leave her marriage, but she never did because she was married to a better man. Recall that Ann-Margret, the Swedish cuteness, was among the few invited to Elvis's memorial, and to show how valuable she is to his family, Elvis's father had asked her to represent the family on a 1977 TV special. Though new talents and stars are born every day, the love for Elvis and his influence on humanity remains evergreen. Interestingly, Elvis as a legendary figure was recently rekindled with the release of Baz Luhrmann's biopic. Elvis was famous for many things, including womanizing, especially with his female co-stars, but all of his meandering, no lady could be as daring as this Swedish-American splendor. Ann-Margret gave him a run for his money by attracting even bigger attention while appearing on screen with him and getting equal billing, which is unusual in Elvis's record. In his state of bewilderment, as he tried to understand why her magical attraction was mesmerizing him, Elvis was told by someone close to him that Ann-Margret was his female version. Their romance created lots of reactions from fans and critics as the widely publicized affair hit the front pages of newspapers. Though very brief, almost everyone would read about it, including Priscilla Presley, who was at the time madly in love with Elvis. But the king thought she was still too young to occupy the position of the Queen. So he was hoping that Ann-Margret would submit to his charming personality, but Anne presented an astonishing side of the seduction game that brought the two into exciting moments that Ann-Margret says brought out the devil within them. The effect this whirlwind romance had on young Priscilla was so much that she decided, out of frustration, not to bother herself with Elvis and his juicy promises henceforth. Little did she know that it was only a matter of time before the passion was over. Yes, it ended just the way it had started, with Elvis returning to Priscilla pretending that Margaret never existed, or that he had forgotten everything about her, and submitting himself to Priscilla in marriage. But he did not stop loving Ann-Margret, even though she was legally married to another. It was not up to a year after his relationship with Anne ended that Elvis decided to go for Priscilla, while Ann-Margret cemented her marriage with Roger Smith afterward. Her marriage became an enduring Hollywood marriage, and a special one indeed, while Elvis was married but kept searching for illicit love, the reason his marriage was barely 4 years before it became history. For Ann-Margret, there is no regret in breaking up with Elvis, because she had hinted how thankful she is in life for the kind of husband she married. Did she marry the right person in Roger Smith? Though a successful actress and a singer, she had said that her marriage remained her biggest achievement. Ann-Margret and her late spouse, American TV personality and film actor Roger Smith, met in 1961, sometime before the Hollywood celeb finished her role in Pocketful of Miracles. Soon their association metamorphosed into a romance that would lead to a blissful marriage. The marriage lasted for about 50 years, from 1967 till the handsome man passed away in 2017. Elvis, who began and consummated an affair with 14-year-old Priscilla, once said he married her because she reminded him of his late mother, but he did not handle his marriage well, as it nosedived just like most of his celebrity romances. Ann-Margret, in her 1994 memoir titled My Story, talked about this epic romance with Elvis, and other things you may not know about the two. Their romance was about a year between 1963 and 1964. At the time, Anne was just 21 and a pretty newcomer in the movie industry. She had her career breakthrough in the musical comedy Bye Bye Birdie, before her epic pairing with Elvis for Viva Las Vegas. Ann-Margret Olsen is a Swedish-born talent, but famous as an American singer and actress. After acquiring dancing lessons as a teenager, fully supported by her mother, Ann-Margret was said to have participated as a youngster in the Morris B. Sachs Amateur Hour and Don McNeil's Breakfast Club. After high school at New Trier High School in Illinois, she showed abundant interest and enthusiasm in stage performance. Though she did not graduate from Northwestern University, Illinois, where she was a member of the group Kappa Alpha Theta, Ann-Margret's talent soared as she joined and performed with different theatre circles, including Subtletones. When George Burns heard of her unique talent and auditioned her for his show, she was so hot that critics suggested that George had a star performer in Ann-Margret because of her special kind of rendition that would later bring her to fame. Her singing and acting journey in the entertainment industry placed her among the notable Hollywood faces in recent times. With a career spanning about 60 years and still counting, this pretty lady has continued to act as a role model for many. After establishing her talent in 1961's Pocketful of Miracles, Ann-Margret went on to become a remarkable Hollywood phenomenon, technically seen as the female version of Elvis Presley because of her sultry and vivacious vocals. Critics say Ann-Margret and Elvis were more of a perfect combination on screen, and the two decided to unite themselves even more closely by kick-starting their romance. Observers say the moment they saw each other, it seemed they knew by instinct that they were to move in together and quench the mutually exclusive passion that ignited within their body chemistry. Was it the devil within, as Ann-Margret later suggested? Trying to explain the momentous epoch that both got lost in a romantic expedition, Ann-Margret wrote that their passion ignited a sizzling repressed desire inside her and Elvis. Though odd and embarrassingly funny, she described it as an inspiring and wonderful sensation. When they looked at each other, she said they saw a practical mirror image of themselves. When Elvis thrust his pelvis, mine slammed forward too, she recalled. As part of the devil that controlled that immoral affair, Ann-Margret says when Elvis's shoulder lowered, she found herself under him. When he whirled, I was already on my heel, whatever that means. Ann-Margret was writing to show how deeply connected she was with Elvis at the time. She and Elvis Presley first met sometime in the midsummer of 1963 in a Hollywood studio. They had come separately and were introduced as co-stars on Viva Las Vegas. Ann-Margret said as soon as the intro was made, all eyes were on her and Elvis Presley. I reached out my hand and he shook it gently. She said that she did so because she had heard so much about him, just like every other young lady at the time. Their initial smile at that handshake, she said, was the spark that broke the ice. Ann-Margret said she and Elvis were not sure what ignited their passion, but she thinks the hot desert sun they worked in might have, though those around say they saw the passion from the outset. It was reported that after the introduction the twosome held each other and disappeared into his dressing-room, and later had a private lunch together. They began performance, as Ann-Margret stated, on the same wavelength, as they sang, danced, and understood themselves on stage. How and when the romance turned bitter is still sketchy, but their eroticism suddenly went south, with some saying that Elvis was more selfish in the relationship, though Ann-Margret said she knew the romance would be over soon based on what she later felt about Elvis. Some circumstances did suggest the same too, as Elvis was said to have asked his manager to take over Ann-Margret's career, but would shelve the idea when he was told by his manager that it would affect his career. Soon the initial bond that permeated when they first met in the dressing-room backstage dwindled, and it became obvious that the two had a different plan for their life, other than keeping their relationship going. And so the romance came to an end sometime in 1964. Elvis subsequently returned to his home-based Priscilla, who turned 18 at the time and was still hoping that Elvis would fulfill his promise to her. Fortunately, Elvis did, after asking for forgiveness. Priscilla Presley, in her memoir, said that when Elvis talked about Ann-Margret, she was so angry that she broke a flower vase and hurled it across the room. Then the demon that united him and Ann-Margret left him. He probably came back to his senses and decided to settle with Priscilla. But his irrational emotion would lead him into more illicit affairs with even more women. Ann-Margret said when they met again several years later, although they tendered their marital vows to their separate spouses, the devil in them was even stronger. Funnily enough, it seemed Elvis had a way of keeping in touch with old flings, and always wanted to rekindle old romances. They said Elvis and Ann-Margret remained passionately in love even after ending their relationship. I recall that it was the same story with Elvis and his wife Priscilla, as he was planning to get back to marriage after the divorce, according to Priscilla. Even Deborah Paget, the lady that turned down his marriage proposal, had a similar experience with the king, as he kept looking for her type of beauty after she turned him down. No wonder Elvis was at the event to feel his old crush when Ann-Margret did her first Las Vegas show in the Riviera Hotel. In her words, Ann-Margret stated that suddenly the old connection burned as strong as it had years earlier. Even though Elvis was famous for meeting and dating young and fresh talents, he also had plans for his older flings, as Ann-Margret noted that he came forward with congratulatory flowers, before using the brief moment of excitement with her to go down on one knee and acknowledge his evergreen feelings for her, that he could not consolidate when she was still available for him. After telling her seductively how he still felt about her, Ann-Margret said that she intuitively knew, but was very touched to hear it from him at the time, and she fortunately was happily married to her husband, and as a morally conscious lady could not have rekindled such an illicit affair with him, though he never stopped sending flowers every time she initiated a fresh show, and the background romance continued until Elvis joined his ancestors in 1977. Ann-Margret had to wait 5 years after meeting Roger Smith for the first time to be invited by him to a San Francisco club where he was performing. Thereafter they consolidated their romantic journey. Unlike what you might be thinking, it was not the electric kind of affection initially, but Ann-Margret said she saw Smith as the right man for her during their third meeting. "I knew I was going to," she once said. The duo dated for about a year or so before tying the knot in matrimony in 1967. From that moment, Smith and Ann-Margret focused on their relationship, and it worked perfectly for them. Ann-Margret, who is now a stepmother of the 3 wonderful children from her husband Smith, who later doubled as her manager at some point in her career, said, "We were together night and day." The two no doubt loved each other and supported one another. Critics think that her marriage with Smith was quite a unique model that is very rare in Hollywood, as the couple celebrated their 50 years together before death does them part. Sadly, Elvis's sudden death did not allow him to reflect on some of the romantic decisions that he made. The big question is, if Elvis wanted to marry Ann-Margret, why he would have always chosen Priscilla over Ann-Margret. Watch this video.